Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the In the 11 podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Griffiths, and this is the show where we bring on those from the world of football to show you what it takes to be in the 11 at the highest possible level. This week's guest, Mike Lansing, has been playing in Europe now for what I think we calculated out as about 5 or 6 years, which in and of itself is an impressive feat. You know, to have a player who is able to go to Europe, perform in Europe, and get that first contract, and then get the subsequent contracts after it, right? Still performing on the pitch and still doing well from that perspective, but also acclimating to the culture of Europe and kind of feeling like Europe is now your home is something that can be difficult for players as well. You know, some players might be doing well on the pitch, but they might feel really homesick off the pitch. And Mike has really embraced everything that's come with his European journey. From the football side of it, he's played at some of the highest levels in the Superliga in Denmark and the Eliteserien in Norway now. And he's also embraced life off the field as well and has made great connections and has, explored and tried new things that he might never have had he stayed in the United States. The other thing I really love about this episode, I appreciate the honesty and the transparency that Mike has about his career. You know, he's had so many positives and so many things that he's grateful for, but he also speaks to some of the hardship and some of the difficulties that he's faced along the way. So I don't want to give too much more away. Here is myself. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, stepping into the 11 now, coming to us from Norway, we have Mike Lansing. First of all, Mike, thanks so much for taking some time to come on the show and really looking forward to hearing about your story.
Looking forward to having a little chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So as we just spoke about there for a second, you know, as someone who's lucky enough to be experiencing some warm weather right now, what is a Norwegian winter really like for those of us who maybe have never experienced something like it?
And I can show you a little bit. We got a winter wonderland out there right now. But it varies quite a bit. It depends on where in Norway you are. And then also, normally it's a lot of rain and wind and snow and hail, and but it also has its ups. It has some pretty winter days as well. So
yeah.
We were just out stuff yesterday, so we're enjoying.
Was that an adjustment kind of when you first got to Scandinavia, you know, and just in general, like training kind of some of those temperatures? Or, I mean, I know Northeast winters are somewhat comparable, but
yeah, I think I was kind of used to training in the cold weather up in Jersey and also in Pennsylvania. Like, we would train outside in the winter, so it wasn't too much of an adjustment, I'd say.
Yeah, if we go back a little bit and paint that picture kind of growing up in Jersey, I read that you played a variety of different sports kind of growing up. What were the kind of sports that you were drawn to? What was that like for you growing up?
Oof. Well, I was lucky enough that my parents allowed me and my sisters to play whatever sports we wanted and do whatever extracurricular activities we wanted to. But the main ones were baseball, basketball, and soccer. And then we had some side ones where we were into snowboarding or skiing and swimming and taekwondo. And so we really dipped our toes into many different sports, I think. So, yeah.
So where do you kind of weigh in on the argument of, you know, I think for maybe Europeans, they think it's more like you should be playing football from a super young age and that's your sport, right? Or maybe the argument of like specialization versus no, play a lot of different sports and kind of become a good athlete.
Well, I think that's what it does is it makes you a good athlete, but it doesn't like help you specialize in that one sport. So I think, you know, playing all the sports growing up and stuff, it helped my athleticism and maybe, you know, yeah, it helped my athleticism, but I wouldn't say it necessarily helped my football per se. Also coming over at 22 instead of, you know, 16 when they start in the professional system, it's a whole different world. So of course, if you can specialize in the one sport, then that's going to get you ahead of the game. But I think there's more joy in playing all these different sports and having a variety of different activities.
Yeah, because I think for every story that you hear of a kid who, rises to the first team level of 16, 17, 18 years old, there's probably a handful that get burnt out with the game by the time they get to that age because they never got to play another sport. So I'm sure having all that variety as a kid, you knew like when it was time to kind of pursue football more seriously, you knew it was the sport for you because you had done all the other sports up to that point.
For sure. And definitely you could get burned out and stuff, but that's like, the plus and minus in going into the one sport. There's a lot to gain, but there's also a lot to lose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you approach kind of your college years, was that sort of the time where you were leaning a little bit more towards football, or what was that kind of decision-making process like for you?
Um, that was more in high school where you kind of have to decide
Yeah.
because in college they specialize. You specialize in one sport. There's not so many multi-sport athletes in college. So in the high school process, I kind of had to decide. So
Mm.
that's kind of when baseball and golf kind of took a side role, and then I had to focus on the football. And then, of course, when I got to college, then there was even more focus on the football. So yeah, it was kind of earlier on in high school when I had to decide.
Mm.
Um,
So what led you to then deciding to kind of choose Bucknell and pursue the sport at the collegiate level and also pursue it specifically at that university?
like you listened to the podcast I did the other day, and I had told them that there was a lot of people that had a lot of faith in me
Hmm.
and kind of pushed me along to pursue it as well. It wasn't necessarily in my head in the first place to really pursue football, but it was something I really enjoyed doing. And then to have people tell me like maybe I should try and take it to the next level, I said like let's go for it. So it was really the people who believed in me that kind of pushed me along for it. And then to choose Bucknell, I had a coach that really believed in me, and he was like, come to the school, and we'll give you the reins, as long as you hold a good level. Um, let's see. I had a couple other like college visits, but there was maybe a little bit of luck involved. When I went to Bucknell, it was a beautiful day. The campus was beautiful, and met some good people and had a really good time there. And then my other college visits, it was like rainy, windy days, cold, and I didn't have as nice of a visit. And that's
Yeah.
one of the big reasons why. But yeah, it was a really nice visit.
I loved that. That seems like a common theme of the episode. And for anyone out there listening that doesn't know what we're referring to, the Footwork Podcast guys, you joined them a couple weeks ago, and it's an amazing episode. I encourage anyone to go and check it out. But I love that you kept referencing kind of the people that helped you get to where you are in your career,
Hmm.
and I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle because I think a lot of times as footballers, we recognize that like you have to be your biggest advocate and your biggest believer kind of because the reality is there's going to be a lot of people that are going to tell you no. But I
Hmm.
think those and sometimes they're few and far between, it feels like those ones that actually tell you that no, I do believe in you, I think you can do this. I think those become so paramount, right? And like so kind of where do you feel like that falls for you in do you think a player can go through and really if everyone's telling them no, like can they be the only ones that are kind of pushing themselves to that next level? Like I feel like everyone has to have at least one or two people in their corner, even if
Yeah.
it's teammates or whatever that just believe in you.
Mhm. That's a really good point because you hear sometimes where like you can't make it all by yourself, and you need people or good people around you and all these things. And I think it's possible, but I think it would be a much more difficult route. If you don't
Yeah.
have people in the corner, of course. Uh, that's it's a good point to think about. Yeah. But I just think it would be a much more difficult route. Like it's really nice to have people in your corner that really believe in you and support you and want you to do well. I'm not saying that it's not possible to make it by yourself, but I think it's definitely easier when you have people, rooting for you. You have to. I think if you have no one in your corner, I think you have to be completely ice cold and have a really, really, really strong mentality. But yeah,
Yeah, because I think it's just an interesting place to be, right? Where you do kind of need some like football is you have to impress coaches, right? You have to impress certain people to get into teams. And so you need at certain point you need to have some people that say, yes, you're good enough for this level. Because they're kind of the gatekeepers, right? So if there's nobody that believes in you, that might be a sign. Okay, I'm not the level where I think I am just
hmm
yet. When you got to Bucknell, was like kind of like you said, the coaching staff giving you that free reign or kind of that license into the starting job. Was that kind of one of those first moments for you where you felt like, all right, some people believe in me and I'm going to take this and run with it? Or what was that process like arriving at Bucknell?
it was interesting because I thought that I was coming in, and at the time they had another keeper, Ormond Kimbrough, and he was a couple of years older than I was, and so I was a bit surprised that they were like, I wouldn't say handing over the reins to me, but
Hmm.
like they had told me like, we really want you to come in and be the one. And then they also recruited another guy named Clark Fox, who was, when I looked him up at the time, he was, top 15 keepers in the country at the time. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? Because now
Hmm.
I got to that guy, and I thought I was going to be playing these years. All this kind of stuff, runs through your head. So when I got there, and then preseason happened, and I started having some of the preseason games, and I was playing well in those games, and slowly but surely, like I got the spot, and I think if you don't perform in those games, maybe I don't get the spot, and as a keeper, it's one spot, so
Yeah.
I don't my next opportunity would have been. So I think it's really important, like no matter what game it is, you really have to take the game by the reins and like, take the opportunity as best you can. So, and that's kind of what I did. But then, after the first 2 years, we kind of went back and forth between me and Clark, and it kind of teeter tottered for the next 2 years. So, coming out of college, I was like, okay, my coach had told me like I should pursue professional football,
Mm.
and he's not giving me the starting spot anymore. And then I'm like, if my college coach doesn't, believe in me now, like, the hell am I supposed to do? And now I'm 7 years into my professional career, so it's like, you know, there's still a way, even though I wasn't playing the last 2 years consistently in college. Like I still was able to make it through. So if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You would probably be like the perfect person to speak on this, like because I'm sure you just met players from all over, and whether they be Americans or even players from elsewhere. Like, do you think really necessarily? And you're the perfect example, right? Where you had a lot of success in your college career, but also a lot of kind of points where maybe it wavered a little bit. And I feel like you can sometimes see that in any career, let alone a player that comes up through the college ranks. Like sometimes the guys who are, the MAC trophy finalists or the Herman Trophy finalists kind of guys, like you think they're shoo-ins to be pros for years and years to come. And then all of a sudden you kind of wonder a couple of years later where they are. And then guys who seemingly came out of nowhere, had no name, are playing in Europe or playing in the States. Like, is there any correlation to that? Like, can there can be anything that can be deemed out of a college career? Or is it really how you go into the pros with it?
I think dealing with adversity like early on and learning as early as you can how to deal with that, I think um, can give you some good foundation for your professional career. So
Mhm.
I think maybe the Mac Herman Trophy finalists, like they're not facing as much adversity as maybe the guys that are a little under the radar, that get benched every once in a while and they have to try and fight their way back in. And like maybe the guys that are at the top are being given that earned, they
Yeah.
get their time and everything, but like they're starting every game, whereas the guys that are maybe a little below the radar, maybe they don't start every game and they're really fighting for it. And I think there's more learning that comes with that, I think. Um, so I think that maybe sets them up a little bit better for like getting hit in the face when they get into the professional world.
Yeah. Yeah, because I heard you speaking like on the show with Sean and Dylan about, I think, I'm not sure if it was with your first club in Denmark, but there was a player like that you had played, I think, with or against in college, who came over like on trial with you guys, or and just like was a baller in the States, and then all of a sudden comes to this different environment, and the game is just played at a different speed, and it's at a different level, and people are thinking, quicker.
Yeah.
And sometimes players just can't adjust that because, like you said, they're not used to being put in environments where they're not succeeding.
Yeah. It's actually my best friend, Chris Thorsheim. Um, we played at Red Bulls together. We played at Red Bulls U23s.
Hmm.
We played at college together, and then we came over on trials together in Denmark. And he ended up going. He was like the last cut at a first division club, Vila. Um, there was like new coaches, new investors, new everything. So when he was on trial, it was like they were just buying players in, and he
Hmm.
was there on trial, and he was like the last cut basically. And then he went and played Division 2 for a while, um, and it was like one of the best players I played with in college is now playing at a lower level than I was. Again, different positions and stuff, but still. Um, and like, you know, all of Denmark was made up of, thousands of Chris Dorsheim. So it's like he had to with these guys that have been playing for so many years already and at the professional level. So yeah, it's difficult and you have to adjust quickly and stuff. And he had a successful like career in Denmark. Um, I think he should have been playing at a higher level. Um, he ended up playing, many games in Division 1 as well. But he never broke through to Superliga.
Hmm.
Uh, but I mean, the guy had over 100 games or something in Denmark. Um, but yeah, of course, like thinking that he was one of the best players I played with in college, of course, I thought he would, play at the top level. But this is how it is sometimes. Um, yeah. It's also opportunities and playing in front of the right coaches and
Hmm.
uh maybe scouts went to a different game or there's some luck in there as well.
Yeah.
So um yeah.
Was there any kind of growing pains, or any moment for you in your process of going on to sign for Vila, that, like, was there a moment kind of when you go in on trial with them where you maybe have that moment of kind of getting punched in the mouth and having to stand back up, and because you obviously went on to kind of sign for that team and then have success on after that, and we'll talk about the highs and the lows, right? But was there a moment like that for you too when you kind of first got over to Denmark?
Oh, well, I was first on trial with Horsens for like 2-3 weeks, and then I went on trial with Vila, but I didn't leave the trials with Horsens on a very good note, I guess.
Mhm.
Like they had made an offer, but it was too low. So my agent had just been like, all right, screw this. We're going to go to Vila because they're like, they're undercutting you. So, we're gonna go train with Vila. And then I went and trained with Vila, and then that was released in the newspaper. And then the head coach of Horsens called me and was like, "Hey, what are you doing? Like, you're supposed to be training with us." And that was kind of like an oh shit moment. Like, what am I
Mm-hmm.
doing? Like, I'm already ruffling feathers, and I'm like, only been here for 2-3 weeks, so um, that was a bit of an adjustment. And like dealing with the whole professional world was so much different than college and high school, where you have your parents there to like deal with stuff, and then all of a sudden I have to like, you know, deal with this kind of stuff, and I was maybe a little bit unprepared. So after my first 2-3 contracts, then you start to understand the ropes and understand all these kind of moving parts, I guess.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
there's like there's a palpable difference to it, right? When in college, yes, everyone's competitive and everyone wants to win, but there's still kind of that underlying, you know, tone of like, we're here for our education, right? Some guys maybe want to play pro, some, that's not really in the cards for them. And then you
Yeah.
step into that next realm where, no, there's guys here are, this is how they feed their families. This is how they keep a roof over their head. Like, I have to imagine that that's a really, you feel that right away, kind of when you step into it.
Yeah. There's it's much more ice cold. There's toes being stepped on, and there's more uh yeah, like you said, it feeds. So this is people's livelihood. It's you or me. And if you're not eating, you're going to be eaten. So you do have to be quite cold at times.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the team aspect in college was a little bit more so than the team aspect here. Like, people are looking out for themselves a little bit more than we're in college. So it's a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So how would you kind of, if you had to characterize or speak to that first season in Vila? I'm sure there's a lot of adjusting to so many new things. I think you spoke to, kind of this is the first time living outside of the States, obviously living internationally. There's so much that goes into doing that. Also, first kind of professional contract. How would you, as you look back on that first season, how would you speak to it?
Difficult.
Mm.
I was lucky enough to have my agent. He hosted me for a few months. It was really nice. Then I started living with like 5 other players in an apartment with one bathroom, one kitchen. That was really. Um, and then I had signed like half with another club, so I already like pushed aside at Vila
Uh-huh.
uh, halfway through. So it was difficult. It was definitely an adjustment. Um, we also had with like guys from 15 different, so it was a very big adjustment in the culture. But yeah, so it was definitely an adjustment. Um, away from family, away from friends, and then yeah, it was a whole new world. But luckily, everyone in Denmark spoke English, and that made it a bit easier.
Mm. Yeah, which by the way, a side note to the language piece, I think you've braved like two of the difficult, more difficult languages to learn. Because just when I was in Denmark, I remember like thinking, oh, I know a little bit of German, right? This should be kind of similar. Not the same at all. And it's funny when I speak to players who have played in Sweden, they're like, yeah, Danish. I don't know what's going on with that language. And then when I was in Denmark, the players or the people in Denmark would tell me that Norwegian was the language for them, where they were like, I don't know what the hell's going on. So
No,
apparently Danish and Norwegian are just two languages that it's like you don't pick them up very easily.
no, and also Swedish. I mean, all three countries like they don't understand each other.
Yeah, which is
So
insane.
the Swedes end up speaking English to the Danes, and the Danes end up speaking English to the Norwegians, and so it doesn't. They're similar words and stuff, but they're very different dialects.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I just thought that was funny that the language piece becomes definitely an interesting part, but I'm sure when you have players from all over the world, sometimes English kind of becomes the standard.
Yep.
But yeah, you spoke about something really fascinating there. Like, I'm always curious to this, and I kind of posed it as a question on like the social media page for the account a while ago, and like, which is more difficult, that first contract or like the contracts after, like kind of staying a pro or getting a chance for the first time? And I think it's interesting kind of what you spoke about there, because I'm sure it was incredibly difficult to get that first opportunity. But then when you have that first season where it's like adversity after adversity after adversity, I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there, a lot of pros that are like, man, this is, I don't know. I don't know if this is what I signed up for. Like, I don't know if I'm cut out for all this. Like, but for you to go on and then kind of forge the career that you have, I think it's remarkable to do that, because, like you said, you were hit with a ton of things to try and handle right off the rip when you kind of signed for your club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know if it's more difficult to sign for the first one. Like, you have to get your foot in the door, of course. But then after that, yeah, of course you have to sustain like good performances and everything in order to get those next contracts, and you have to perform in every match. And the second you start giving your coaches doubt, then they start to think like, hey, maybe this guy's not for us, and then they tell the sports director, and the sports director is not going to present you with a new contract. So you have to continually perform.
Yeah.
So it's also difficult to get the next contracts.
Yeah.
And if you're not performing, maybe you have to step down and go a level down, and then your pay is down and everything. So it can be tough.
Yeah, because definitely it's a business of kind of, what are you doing for me lately? What's the last couple games look like? What's your last few performances? And that's kind of your currency and going into a future contract or future team. Did you kind of, when you started to get your footing in Denmark, did you kind of start to map out a way and like kind of going towards the Superliga, or was it just, I'm going to do the best that I can and kind of whatever comes my way?
We had a plan in the beginning, and that was mapped out to go to the Superliga,
Mm-hmm.
and then at some point back to the MLS or something. And of course, things don't always go to plan, but they went to plan pretty quick. But I think I took a step to the Superliga a little too soon, because I didn't even get games in the first division. I got a couple cup matches, and then the staff at Aalborg had seen me in some reserve matches and stuff, and they were like, okay, we want to take him on. And so then I made the move to Superliga, but that was before I had any experience in the first division. So it was maybe a step too soon. I don't know if I was ready for it. But yeah, we had the plan, and now, I have some loose plans, and I have some high goals and stuff, but I kind of am like, okay, let me perform day in and day out, perform at the games and stuff. And then we see what happens, because in football, you never know where your next contract is going to be presented. And, if you have the goal of getting back to the States or something, but then a huge contract comes in a different country, it's like, your plans have to change a little bit. And I think, people should be open to accepting contracts in other countries and stuff. So, yeah, I think it's good to just have an open mind and be ready to play anywhere.
Yeah, I found that most players kind of have a similar sentiment, that they feel like because what's there's some saying, right, the best laid plans like always go to you can try and plan out a career as much as you want, but the reality of football is it changes every moment, and it changes on a dime, and you never know really what's going to happen. And we've heard stories of players kind of change the course of their career with one game, and that can be positively or negatively.
Exactly.
So kind of when you then arrive in that Superliga level, I have to imagine there's kind of another adjustment again, right? You first have the adjustment just being as a professional in Denmark, and now I'm at the pinnacle here.
Yeah, it was really nice to, like, I had a goal, I guess, to get onto FIFA, and then when I was on FIFA, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then yeah, like that was another adjustment, making that step, because the crowds were bigger, the players on the team were more demanding. They wanted a higher level every day. They were cold. They were quick to tell you if you were shit or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely an adjustment. It was more professional. The fans were more demanding. There was a bigger infrastructure. There was more people in the office. Yeah, it was a bigger social media. There was a bit more pressure there.
Yeah.
So there was another adjustment there. Yeah.
Is there any moment that stands out to you in your time at Aalborg, in maybe it's the first time you play in a packed stadium, or maybe it is media day, or are there any little moments that you look back on as kind of in the time feeling like, wow, this is a little bit surreal to be here right now?
I remember at Aalborg, like, the nerves that I had were, I felt like I couldn't control them as well. And I was given a cup match here and there, and I think they were quite spread out, so I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform in those games. So again, it was difficult. The first few years of the career were difficult with these games that were just so far between each other. It was like, I was younger, and I just said, like, oh, this game means so much. Like, if I do well, like, that's really good. But if I don't do well, like, maybe my career's over. I really put a lot of pressure on myself, and that's something that I learned to kind of stop doing, of course. But that took experience and time to understand, like, that you can't really do that. But yeah, like, it was a big learning curve for me, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of speaking to that point, I remember I listened to something that Ben Foster had spoken about, I think on his podcast or somebody else's podcast, that kind of earlier in his career, he was the same way. Like, after a bad result or a bad performance, he kind of carried that result with him for the rest of the day, maybe a couple days, maybe a week. And then as he got further along into his career, it was almost like as soon as he left the facility after the game that day, like that's where it stayed. That's where the match stayed. And because that just had to be kind of the mindset that he took, because he's like, I can't take this home with me every day, right? If we lose, or I don't play well, it's not really going to do me any good to just continue to carry around that kind of emotional baggage. Like, do you feel like you now, with your maybe psychology towards the game, like you talked about, you've gotten a lot better with that kind of pressure you put on yourself in terms of the performance aspect?
Mm-hmm. I've definitely improved. And it's a thing that I continue to work on, and I think all players should work on it. But yeah, it's definitely improved. I can't say that I can leave it at the door, as well as he does. It definitely affects me for a day or two, but I definitely try not to bring that, a poor performance or a bad result or something into the next game. That's got to be a clean slate. But into the next training or something, I think it's human, it's natural. A poor result or a poor performance is not something that we want. So I think it's natural to carry it with you for a little bit, and I think
Mm,
it's difficult, to just drop it at the door. It's easier said than done. So
yeah.
if he can really do that, that's very impressive.
Yeah, and it certainly could have been a bit of a hyperbole, but I'm also sure, that's probably something that maybe he's working towards that, but it probably took him years and years to get there, right? And that's a keeper who played at a high level for a long time. And um, if you spoke to this in the past, that keep the position of a goalkeeper is so mentally taxing, right? And I think it's so
Mhm.
much different. Like, can you even put it into words, maybe what is the difference kind of between the mentality of a goalkeeper and the mentality of a field player? Like, is there, it feels like there's definitely a difference to those two positions, you know?
Well, definitely. I mean, you have the goal right behind you, So if you make a mistake, you're the last line of defense. So I think it's easier for a keeper to turn more into a defensive position and go on your heels a little bit more than an offensive position, um, which is not something you want to do.
Mm,
Um, and I think some field players can go into the game in a much more aggressive mindset, where a keeper needs to be a bit more like calm and collected. Um, and yeah, I mean, they're standing in the back watching the game for 80% of the game, whereas the rest of the team is moving around and doing things for the entire match. They're very involved in the game, and sometimes it can be a long time in between when you're involved. So it's important to stay focused and be present and everything. So yeah, it's a whole different sport, I think, to the field players. It's very, very, very different positions.
yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting. I think that's probably the perfect way to say it. It does feel like a completely different sport. Like even the tools that you're using to compete in the sport are the complete opposite of the rest of the. And I think it would be, interesting from somebody that doesn't, isn't familiar with football whatsoever to describe those two positions. Like, you probably
Mm.
hit the nail on the head right there. Like, it's just such a different kind of going into work every day and trying to perform that task that is required of you.
We have different coaches. We
Yeah.
have different gym sessions. We have different conditioning. We wear gloves. The players don't. I mean, that list can go on. It's totally different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Does that ever, like, I've always wondered this, does that ever feel kind of like isolating at all, or like
of
separating
course,
from the group? Yeah.
of course. And you can always be the scapegoat as well. If something
Yeah.
doesn't go well in the game, or a goal is scored, all eyes go to you. A defender can make a mistake, but there's still always the keeper behind. So yeah, it's I feel like it's a position that has more pressure, but yeah, that just comes with the position, I guess. And
No, yeah.
it
Totally agree.
takes experience to learn how to handle it. And I think guys at the end of their career can also reflect on that as well. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't begin to imagine what the pressure is like, especially at, the higher and higher levels. And like you mentioned too, you've got thousands of screaming fans, whether it be in support of you or in the exact opposite right behind you. So I'm sure the atmosphere is conducive to, pressure.
Hmm.
Um, and you spoke a little bit about that, like, kind of separate the involvement just in the game itself, right? But also kind of in your time with Horsens and with Alborg. Like, sometimes it felt like games were kind of few and far between. Um, like, what is that like to stay ready, to stay locked in week in and week out when you're training, just always with that notion of, all right, I need to be ready at the weekend, but sometimes I'm not really kind of going out and performing on the weekends. I'm not getting the chance to.
Yeah. Again, difficult. Um, it's not easy to train day in and day out and not get that reward at the end of the week. So it's kind of like delayed gratification, I guess.
Yeah.
The light at the tunnel is sometimes, further than we'd like, but um, again, it's important to stay ready and be ready for the opportunities, because if and when the opportunities come and you don't take them, then it's right back to square one, and it's a long path back. So you have to stay ready. Um, yeah, it's important to work on your mental as well in those kind of situations too, because you have to take care of your head and make sure that you're okay off the pitch, and
Mm.
involving yourself in things that you enjoy. Um, yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy that you spoke to that too, because definitely something that's it's another motivation for me, and why I like sharing this podcast and doing these stories, right? Is I kind of like to kind of shed a little bit of a light on the mental health side of the game, and I like that you speak to kind of the psychology of it, also the having other interests and having kind of a life outside of football. I think is really really important, um,
Mm,
because it gives you that outlet to express yourself in other ways, kind of. I know I can speak personally to the fact of like I felt at certain times in my career like I tied so much of my like value and my worth towards like how I performed. And
yeah,
so when I was performing poorly, it was like, all right, you're performing like shit. Are you a shit person? And it gets very twisted in your head.
of course. Yeah.
But it sounds like for you, you've done a better job of kind of seeking out resources, but also like giving yourself all these different outlets to kind of maybe sometimes leave football at the door and go do something else.
Touching back on what you just said, like, I went home over this last break, and not one person that I went into contact with was like, um, you know, oh, you had a shit, like, you just sat the bench this year, like, you must be a shit person too. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, everyone that
Yeah.
I was in contact with was like, um, we had a great time together, and they don't judge you for what you do on the pitch. Like, nobody really cares back home.
Mm.
Of course, they want me to do well and stuff, but
Yeah.
like, if I don't, it's like they're not gonna shun me and you know put me outside. I don't know, like, yeah. Um, but again, like with the interest and stuff, yeah, I think it's very important to have interests outside of football, and to use your time wisely outside as well, because like here I live in a cabin about 10 minutes away from the city and the stadium. I live here by myself. And it would be very easy for me to come home after a tough game or something and just be by myself,
Mm.
which I think is not the right thing to do. I think it's important to like surround yourself with people, and the people that have their families and friends and stuff. I think it's important to like go be with them after games and stuff. And yeah, having interests outside is important as well, because you're not just a footballer. Like, you have a life outside of football, and there's much more to life than football.
Yeah.
You know of course, like, there's many things you can save for after football is done, when you're retired, but that doesn't mean that when you're in a certain place you can't enjoy the things that the place has to offer. Like in Norway, I have all the diving and fishing and hiking opportunities that I could ever ask for. So I try to take advantage of that as much as I can without it affecting football. But I think that gives me joy and puts me in
Mm.
a good space for my performances as well. And if I thought that it wasn't, then I probably wouldn't do it so much. But this is what this area of the country has to offer for me. So I take full advantage of that. And, when I was in Denmark, maybe I golfed a lot more. And that was a lot of fun. And that helped me keep a calm mind as well. So yeah, I think it's important.
Yeah, yeah, you spoke to so many important things there. Like I think it's an important thing for, maybe any player out there that's going through something similar to understand like that there's so many people in your life that, like you said, don't it doesn't matter if you win, lose, or draw on the weekend. Like they're still just there in your corner for that reason alone. And that was something that I definitely had to kind of remind myself, like I have all these people in my life that they truly don't care. And in a good way, like the way I perform on the weekend. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, you're 100% right in that. I think you bringing your best self to your football means you need to, you just spoke to the 90% mentality of a goalkeeper, right? It's like if you're already coming into the training or into a match and you're not really at a good spot mentally, but hiking or doing these activities outside of the game can kind of boost your mood. Like that's, I think, a huge kind of factor and probably something that can be just as important as putting in extra training or extra gym work, like coming in with a clearer mind and a clearer mentality.
Mhm.
And speaking to that, like kind of cultivating of relationships, it's something that I haven't really asked before, but you bring up an interesting point. Like as somebody who comes from a foreign country and is adjusting to a lot of different things, as we've touched on in this episode, like how do you kind of create that, that family or that network around you as that support system? Because it is always tough, when you walk off the pitch and other players go and they hug with their families. And, I always felt like kind of, damn, like everybody's across the pond for me. There's no one for really go
Yeah.
and chat to right now.
No, 100%. It's difficult, but I think of myself as a bit social, and I like uh, I like people that have similar interests and are outgoing and also want to hang out too. So um, you can kind of feel that out in the locker room and see who's up for whatever activities and stuff, or whoever else wants to be social, because you can't force people to
Yeah.
want to hang out with you and stuff, but you can create an environment that also promotes that too. Like, hey guys, I'm going to have dinner tonight. Like, you're all welcome to come. And then, there's been times where I invite the whole team and only, 3, 4 guys come. That's just either they are the ones that have the time for it. They're the ones that want to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, so be it. But like, at least like you put your head out there and like say like, hey, like let's go do something. Like, I think it's good to be the advocate for you know doing some sort of activities. I started fishing and diving and stuff when I was here, and then I poke my head out there to see who else wants to do it. And we had a couple city guys that come and they see that I'm fishing, and they're like, oh, let me try. Then
Mhm.
now they're stuck on it. So yeah, like I said, just kind of making it possible for other people to join, and then all of a sudden you start creating relationships and stuff, and that's where it comes from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome because it kind of sounds like, you put yourself out there just in and coming to another country and trying to pursue something as difficult as football. And it's like just keeping that momentum when it comes to, trying new activities and then also
Mhm.
getting other people involved with them as well. And as you mentioned, it kind of becomes just as important as part of your whole like ecosystem as a footballer to have those types of activities and those types of people kind of in your corner. Um,
100%.
yeah.
I wouldn't want to look back on my career and say like, oh, I just played football when I played. And I live abroad from my family and stuff, and I think it would be a shame if I didn't take advantage of what was here, and create good relationships as well. Um, like I said, football is football, but there's also going to be people in your life after football too. So I think it's important to make genuine relationships and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's
Mm.
one of the things for me, I can say for sure that it's probably the thing I'm most grateful for in terms of football. Like, especially at this point in my career, yeah, I still love the game, but I think for me, it's so much more about all the people that I've met along the way. And I have teammates from all around the world that I can kind of call to as friends because, yeah, like you said, eventually the ball's going to stop rolling for all of us. And that's the stuff that you're going to carry with you. So it's hugely important. I agree.
Yeah, 100%.
If we talk about the football piece kind of currently and where you're at, maybe can you speak to a little bit the move kind of over to deciding to come over to Norway, and maybe what your experience has been like thus far from a football side of things?
So, like we touched on earlier, like I had an original plan to play in Superliga and then maybe play back in the States and stuff. And then I never imagined myself playing in Norway. And then, of course, once I got the move here, you know, they were keen on me being the one, and that's what happened for that first year. I had to get a little surgery and stuff, and then they called in Sten Griffiths, who had a very good season last year. It was a bit of a punch in the face, like, you know, and I had to deal with that, you know, adversity again. But I think football careers are about dealing with adversity and overcoming that adversity and not quitting. I'm a big advocate of not quitting. So there's many times where I think about, like, wow, this is tough, and like there's no opportunities right now, or, you know, whatever, and you can really beat yourself down. But you know, at some point, you know, I will be the one again, whether it's here or at another club, and, you know, and then I got to take that opportunity. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at now, and we're trying to figure out what's going to be the best solution. But yeah, I mean, the years in Norway have been my favorite. You know, also outside of football, because Norway has been, you know, so good for my hobbies. You know, me being an outdoorsman, it really suits me. So of course I would love to be the one at Ålesund, because, you know, the environment and where I live and the people here and everything is, you know, 100% perfect. But you know, the playing time is what I'm looking for. So yeah, if I can't get it here, we have to look for solutions and stuff, because of course I don't want to be the two, and I think it wouldn't be very ambitious if I wanted to just be the two and, you know, stick it out. So yeah, so we're trying to find a good solution and see what we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be your advice to a keeper that calls you in maybe a similar kind of position? Like where do you think it falls between, I want to stay at this club and I want to push to try and be the one? Or like when does it shift to that point of, hey, maybe it's best for me to look to go out on loan and try and get minutes, or, you know, kind of look for greener pastures? Like what's the kind of cutoff, or what kind of signs do you look for?
Well, I think there's many different factors. You know, you kind of have to feel it out yourself, and, you know, what the situation is like at your own club. And I don't think any coach is going to guarantee you minutes, unless you can have that in a contract. Like I was listening to Ben Foster's podcast as well, and he was talking about, like, when he went on loan, it was in his contract that if he was fit, he would get 100% of the minutes.
Wow.
You know, I don't know if that's in the lower league contracts and stuff, but if you can work that into your loan agreement or something, then, you know, go for it. But yeah, you kind of have to see what the situation is like, and see if it's like, okay, this other guy's going to have it, or the coach is telling me this other guy has it. And if you've been sitting on the bench for a while, you know, maybe it's time to get going. You know, you have to figure that one out. But I think the minutes on the pitch are the most important, because you can train and train and train, but the games are, you know, really what count. So you know, I can have a month of really good training, and then if I get put into a game and don't play so well, it's like, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, you really have to perform in the game. So yeah, I would always say to go and get minutes.
Yeah, you answered the question kind of perfectly there, because that's always something I was kind of curious of. It's like, if there's the difference between, you know, okay, I can go and train in the Superliga, basically I'll be on a contract, but it's just training, or you know, minutes actually in maybe a level below, or even if it's same league but just kind of lower level team. I do feel like most players, and even coaches would advise, like, yeah, you want to go where you can get the game time because there's nothing that can replicate actual game minutes.
Nope. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. Well, man, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking some time. I'm sure it's busy with still in preseason, right? Because the season kicks off in a couple weeks.
Yep. Very long preseason. We were back, I think, January 15th, and I don't think we start till April 10th. So it's quite a long preseason.
Yeah, there's a super long preseason. Yeah, but like I said, I appreciate it. Like, I'm sure it's busy. But yeah, I can't thank you enough. I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure the people will as well. So thank you very much.
No problem. Happy to be here.
That's it for this week. Mike Lansing, one of the top American goalkeepers, plying his trade out in Europe. I want to thank him so much for taking time to come on and share his story. As I mentioned there a little bit in the episode, he was also on the Footwork podcast. So if you want even more context to Mike Lansing, I would definitely encourage you to go and check that out. Thank you guys again so much for your support, for your listenership. I hope that you learned a lot from a goalkeeper at the level that Mike is at, because I know I certainly did. Just to know that players, even at that level, sometimes experience the same things that we do. It's definitely, it kind of puts your mind at ease, and it makes you feel like, okay, this is something that's common amongst a lot of different players. Yeah, so that's it from me this week. Thank you guys. Thank you, Mike, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.